In this video, we're going to talk about the benefits of using the MonumentLetteringCenter.com fonts in MemorialDESIGNER. The Monument Lettering Center fonts have been designed using historical materials to build modern versions of the standard monumental alphabets created during the past 150 years. We wanted to highlight some key features and the way that you would use them in Memorial Design. First thing that we'll talk about is alternates. The Monument Lettering Center fonts are open type fonts that allow open type alternates. So if I were to take some text here, for instance, the name Aaron, I could click and swipe on this A and it would give me a down arrow where I can choose an alternate. So if instead I wanted to use this alternate, you can see how the bar drops down a little bit further. This is useful for when you're trying to match fonts out in the cemetery that have that bar set at a certain height. It's also often that you run into fonts like this where you have a W that is the two V's on top of each other, or perhaps you would want to switch it to a W like this. Having alternates lets you ultimately make that choice as to which one you want to have. Another option is quotes. You can have quotation marks like this, or if you wanted to, you could flip the quotes upside down. These are all open type alternates. Another open type feature is ligatures. With ligatures, you end up having two letters that come together in a certain way. So, for instance, on this one, if we grabbed the C and the O, we could come like this and do a discretionary ligature where the O becomes nested inside the C. If we go back to our original page here, I'll show how you can make this long line of text look a little bit more stylistic just by using ligatures. If I grab this N and the T, I could join those together. The L and the E, I would just make that a small e, and do the same thing there. The two T's can actually join together at the top. As we showed before, the C and the O can get joined together there. So by using ligatures, you're able to stylize your text a little bit differently and make it look a lot more artistic. One of the great things about the Monument Lettering Center fonts is the amount of characters you have in the character set in the fonts. This is especially helpful when you're doing things like accents or other languages. For instance, this here is written in Icelandic, and if I wanted to be able to type that out, I would just type like this. I can switch over to my Icelandic keyboard layout in order to just type in the letters. Or if you don't have a certain keyboard layout, then what you can do is you can go to Insert Character, choose the font that you want, and you can browse through all of the available characters. If I wanted this E, for instance, to have an accent, I could just double click here and it would give it that accent mark. Most monument fonts do not have a large character set. For instance, this font here doesn't have the extra characters nor the accents. By having the fonts with a large character set and having accents, it speeds up your workflow. If we were to switch over to a design here, the text along the top that's in Spanish has the accents over the E's. If you weren't using a font that had accent marks, these accents would likely be drawn in by hand, which takes time, especially when you're switching fonts. So if I were to switch from the Vermarco to another font, you'll see that the accent marks, of course, correspond with those letters. And everything is editable. If I were to change the epitaph, it doesn't leave any of the accent marks that would have been there had they not been part of the font. Once again, here on the name, if we needed to accent the E, we could very simply do that as well. Alternates are another good way to be able to use characters that would work out well for different languages or different cultures. If we went to this design, for instance, the C in McDaniel's, if we wanted to, we can select just the C and choose the open type stylistic alternate. So we can go with an underline, a double underline, or even these dots. Your choice of font can definitely change the way that a design looks. If we were to switch over to this design here, that is currently in the MD Quad font, we'll go ahead and see what it would look like in a different font. One of the nice things is being able to do a side-by-side comparison between two different options. So if we had the original over here, then our new choice over on the right, we could simply come over and highlight, and you can use your down arrow on the keyboard, or you can just highlight over it with the mouse. But as you do that, it'll update on the fly, and you can see then what it's going to look like in that new font. If we did the same thing, made two copies here, then we can easily play around with this and see which one we like the best. As you can see, depending on what we choose for the font can make a big difference on what we want the design to look like. If we zoomed into this one, the Unseal Gothic, we can go even a little bit further in changing it the way that we want it to be. If we grab the E, there are alternates that we can choose. We can also do the same thing down here and choose the alternates for these letters. That way they match across the entire font or the entire stone. We could also switch, if we wanted to, the quotes. We could flip them so that they're mirrored on either side. And the good thing about being able to do this with open type features is that it's all editable text. It's all very easy to switch, and you can always go back if you didn't want to keep it this way. The dashes as well. If we do a stylized dash, then it will match the font a bit better. So we can grab these, do two dashes in a space, and it would give us a stylized dash. We can also then easily change what color we have the stone in. So you can see there's a big difference between what we had originally and this other option. Going back to the dashes for a moment, it's often the case that you have to duplicate an existing design that has dashes, and so if we were to take a look at this, a lot of the fonts have the ability to set custom dashes. Once again, if I were to click twice on the dash and then hit spacebar, it switches to a stylized dash. If I do 3 times instead, then it goes to an even longer stylized dash. If I wanted to match the size of one that's existing, we can use brackets and then dashes and then ending brackets to be able to get an even longer dash. So depending on how much of a dash you need, you can go small or large depending on what exactly you need to be able to do. I highly recommend the Monument Lettering Center fonts for anyone that needs to be able to duplicate or match historical lettering. If we switched over to this, that is a photograph of a stone taken out in the cemetery, oftentimes it's the case that you have to put in an extra date of death or match existing text. One of the Memorial Designer tools that we have is able to make it so that if I clicked here and then here on my photo, it's only 3/8 of an inch right now, but if I selected the photo and knew that that was a 1-inch font, I can auto size to 1 inch and hit apply, and it would resize this photo then to the size that I need it to be. And if I'm a little crooked, I can do the same thing where I just take a line and align it along here. Select the picture, run auto size. This time I'm not going to resize, I'm simply going to straighten along the horizontal axis. That way it'll straighten it up for me. This way, if I needed to, I could start duplicating this text. The Monument Lettering Center has fonts that don't come standard with Memorial Designer. For instance, this one here. We'd have to choose MLC Roman, bold, to get a match. If we compare the standard circular punctuation to the existing punctuation, we can see that this is more squared off. So instead, what we would want to do is we'd want to grab these and choose the stylistic set of having the squared off punctuation. If we got to the point that we typed in the date that we needed, we'll go ahead and switch over to our stylistic set here. Once you've got it typed in, you've got the ability to break it apart so that you can get to these individual ones and maybe make them a little bit bolder if you need to match an existing font here. So we can make this a little bit more bold. We can also come in here with our shape tool and drag these parts down to get it a little bit longer to match the existing one. That way when it comes time to do our date, we'd be able to get it done. The next feature that we'll discuss is outline fonts. Sometimes you want your text to not be inside of a panel and you want it just to stand out a little bit more by itself. In order to get a frosted, shadowed look like this in the past, you used to have to use two different fonts. So you'd have one for the inside and one for the outside. If we go to broad double outline, for instance here, there is the outline version. But there's also just the inside version. What that allows us to do is we can apply a shadow to that. And it's very easily editable. Some of the fonts, for instance, this modern outline one, we have the interior here, and if we were to duplicate that, then we can choose the outline version around it. There are 3 different outline versions for different thicknesses. So depending on how thick you wanted that to be, you could choose a different font. Or if you just choose the inside font, then you can outline that however much you want. Although the block shadow is an effect applied to the text, the great thing about it is that it's all ready to go as far as sandblasting goes. It's also adjustable, so you can tell it how big or how small you want your shadow to be. If we go to the wireframe, we'll see that it's actually all ready to go. It also works great with granite fills. So for the fonts that have outline versions, it's nice to be able to have also the inline or the inside version of that font so that you can customize your outlines as much as you want. The last thing that we'll talk about is organizing the fonts. One of the nice things is that you can create filters. So I have currently filtered my list to only show the Monument Lettering Center fonts. If I uncheck that filter, it then goes to every font that I have on my machine, so 1660 of them. I can filter even further if I wanted to, for instance, only filtering to the SpaceWrite versions of the fonts, or only filtering to the Signature series. Although many of the Monument Lettering Center fonts are based on historical stamps, in the future there will be fonts released like this formal script one that gives you the ability to make it look just a little bit nicer. By having such wonderful fonts, you're able to adjust things to make it look that much nicer on the stone. Not only that, but once again you can switch and choose perhaps a different stylistic alternative that makes it look even that much nicer. The Monument Lettering Center fonts are the best produced fonts for our industry by far, better than any other ones that I've ever seen, which is why I like to support them as much as I can. On their website, you're able to get to all of their currently available fonts, which are 40 of them. They have them categorized as well as tagged, depending on what you're looking for. You can definitely get the fonts directly from their website, or if interested, you can also get the fonts through me. When you buy the fonts with MemorialDESIGNER, I'm able to give a bundle discount. So hopefully you'll check out these wonderful fonts and be well on your way to designing the best memorials you've ever done.